Even 5 years after its announcement, CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 is still something of an enigma. Even after all this time, we know next to nothing about this game aside from the fact that it's an adaptation of Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk 2020 universe, which gives us some vague ideas about the story, setting, lore, characters, classes, and some gameplay elements. But even then, with 2077 taking place 57 years after the events of 2020, it also gives CD Projekt Red a bit of a blank slate to really dig in and make Cyberpunk their own. So there is still a lot we don't know and a lot that could change from the transition between tabletop RPG to video game. What this means is that until CD Projekt Red decides to blow the lid on their upcoming new game, we are left to our own devices to dig through any potential new information and have some fun speculating along the way. That certainly seems to be the idea that YouTuber The Triple S Leak had when they decided to present what they described as new information about Cyberpunk 2077 that they got through an industry insider. As is the way these things go, the source's identity was left anonymous so as to not risk his current employment. Also, do keep in mind that this is all rumors and speculations, and as such, should all be taken with a grain of salt. However, I do think that the information that was presented seems plausible enough that it's at least worth bringing to your attention. There were two aspects of the game that were addressed, the game world and the classes. On the topic of game world, it was said that Cyberpunk 2077 will use The Witcher 3's seasonal system to generate maps on a massive scale. And by Witcher 3's seasonal system, I'm assuming they're referring to the system that governs things like the day and night cycle, dynamic weather, and various other aspects that dynamically alter the world. Now, apparently with Cyberpunk, instead of using this tech to generate weather and the like, it will apparently be used to generate dynamic, destructible environments. An example that they provided was that if you engage in a firefight and the surrounding area is heavily damaged, you might come back later to find some robots or androids repairing or rebuilding everything, and then you might come back even later to find that everything is more or less back to normal or subtly changed. This might explain why there has been such a heavy emphasis on physicalized objects and destruction models in CD Projekt Red's job listings for environment artists as of late. Now, I doubt that this means that Cyberpunk 2077 won't feature any day and night cycle or dynamic weather, but do keep in mind that with this being a cyberpunk setting, these things aren't as important since there will be a bigger emphasis on things like cities, buildings, skyscrapers, alleyways, neon nights, cloudcast days, and all the claustrophobic and noir motifs that are inherent to the genre. This is a stark contrast from Witcher 3, where things like day and night cycle and dynamic weather are very important due to the fact that it's a fantasy setting with wide open spaces and expansive vistas. So I can see how it's plausible that Witcher 3's seasonal system might be repurposed to focus more on dynamic changes that may occur within the city itself. Moving on, another interesting bit of information that was conveyed about the game world was about its size. Get this, apparently the world of Cyberpunk 2077 may end up being as big as 4 times larger than the maps of Witcher 3 and all of its DLCs combined. This is apparently why CD Projekt Red has been hiring so many environmental artists and level designers as of late. There's just a lot of space to fill with content. According to the anonymous source, areas you can expect to see in the game include tall skyscraper areas similar to the one seen in the teaser trailer, professional areas with strip malls and businesses strewn about, residential areas that are less suburbs and more residential tower housing, slums, damaged ruins, and even radioactive areas or high-risk zones. None of this is really surprising information since these types of areas are par for the course in a cyberpunk setting, but it's still cool to hear about the possibilities nonetheless. So, in summary, as far as the game world is concerned, you've got dynamic, destructible environments that may repair themselves or subtly change over time, a map that's 4 times the size of Witcher 3 and its DLCs put together, and a wide variety of different cyberpunk-type accessible areas both in and out of the main city. This brings us to the second topic that the alleged leaked information addresses, classes. They began by referencing how recently Mike Pondsmith confirmed that all classes from Cyberpunk 2020 will be in 2077, including unusual ones like Rocker Boy and Media. While Mike didn't provide any specifics on how the more unusual classes would be handled, he did mention that there would be a lot of subtleties there.
One thing I find really interesting about the game is the classes. There are rock stars, the journalist class, executive class. Can we really expect that to be in the game? Or would you like?
Yes, you can. They're all going to be there, but I can't tell you more than you're going to find some surprises about how we've done it. And I think you're really going to like it. There's a lot of subtlety going on there.
With that in mind, here's how classes will allegedly work in Cyberpunk 2077. CD Projekt Red is apparently building some kind of a web system for leveling and specializing into classes. You'll be choosing a specific class route, you can spec it out and make it your own, with some wiggle room for multi-classing. For the most part, players will be locked in a chosen skill tree, but the game will apparently, at certain points, grant players the choice and ability to reset their character and choose a different path or class. This was done so that players wouldn't have to restart the entire game after dozens upon dozens of hours of gameplay in case they end up not liking their current class, skill tree, or chosen path. They want to open up the possibility of players being able to switch their class without necessarily losing a ton of progress. At the same time though, there will be consequences or after effects from switching classes mid-game, particularly where story is concerned. Apparently, the game may begin in such a way that you can pick from a handful of starting stories, but eventually as you play through the game and as you become acquainted with your character and class, you'll be funneled into a main storyline that has several branching paths where you do class-related quests. During these junctions, if you decide to reboot your character and change your class for whatever reason, you might open up new paths, but also close other paths along the way. There might be certain compromises you have to make. The way they described it was that CD Projekt Red wants to make Cyberpunk 2077 more accessible, but at a high cost. You can't just switch classes or respec your character whenever it suits you. These will be difficult decisions. Now, it's worth noting that Witcher 3 also allowed you to respec your character through a rare potion called the Potion of Clearance. These were very rare, but if you found one, you could keep it and at any point decide to drink it and reset your character and redistribute your skill points. So character resets are not a new concept for CD Projekt Red. But with Cyberpunk 2077, it looks like they might be taking the feature to the next level by tying it more deeply into the narrative and by making it a bigger, more impactful decision. Makes a lot of sense when you think about it. In Witcher 3, you play as a predefined character, Geralt, and as far as progression goes, you're just putting points in skills you want him to specialize in. In Cyberpunk 2077, on the other hand, you play as a custom character. You pick a class, and the class you pick will have a significant impact on how the story unfolds. And with how you pick a class now and how these classes are tied to story, it is only logical for CD Projekt Red to make character respecs and class changes be tied to story as well. So as far as classes go, the bottom line is this. After you choose your initial class, they'll allow you to experiment a little bit. They're going to let you make some choices, but once you make these choices, you're going to be locked in, with the possibility of respecing your character and switching classes if you're really unhappy with your choice. But from a narrative standpoint, this may open new doors and close other ones, making this a substantial decision. Assuming this is all true, there is a lot going on there, and maybe this is what Mike Pondsmith meant when he said that there would be a lot of subtleties.
I can't tell you more than you're going to find some surprises about how we've done it. And I think you're really going to like it. There's a lot of subtlety going on there.
So there you go, folks. Potential new information about Cyberpunk 2077's world and classes. Thank you for tuning in. I'd love to hear what your take on all of this is in the comments below. Also, if you enjoy my content, I hope you'll consider supporting me on Patreon to help our community remain independent from third-party sponsorship and corporate interference. And to be further updated on all things Cyberpunk 2077, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!